Hello everyone. Well, 8 types of pronouns. You know this, so let's use it for revision. And remember, you don't need to know the grammatical terminology, but you do need to know that you're using those pronouns correctly. So first of all, a review of personal pronouns. Remember, a pronoun is a word that replaces a noun. And for personal pronouns, we use them to represent people. When we use I or we, if we're looking at gender, if we're looking at the person, or if we're just talking about a number when we're thinking about we and us. So we talked about there are 2 types of personal pronouns, subject and object. So make sure that you're very clear that you use the subject pronouns in the position of the subject in the sentence and the object pronouns in the position of the object part of the sentence. So why do we use personal pronouns? For respect, for kindness, and for inclusivity. And when we're writing, we use pronouns so that we can make the start of our sentences more interesting, or so that we don't have to keep repeating that noun. A quick reminder, subject to object. So when you're looking at the subject pronoun, that's on the left-hand side of this information, and the object pronoun is on the right. So I becomes me, you becomes you, he becomes him, she becomes her, it becomes it, we becomes us, and they becomes them when you are changing the pronouns from subject to object. So subject, I, you, he, she, it, we, they. Object, me, you, him, her, it, us, them. And can you actually work out which box these pronouns should go into? Because these are the pronouns that we use when we're thinking about ownership. So yours is possessive. His can be used as a personal pronoun or a possessive pronoun. I is personal subject pronoun. He, yes, you've got it now. Him, yes. Her, good. You, theirs, she, its, ours, they, it. What about me? Yes, us. Mine? I hope you got possessive there. Hers. And there's hers again. So I beg your pardon, his and hers. So you don't need to know, is it a personal pronoun, is it a possessive pronoun, is it an object pronoun? But you do need to know where to use these pronouns in the sentence. So this type of activity is very useful when you're at home to just create 3 boxes, get a number of pronouns, cut those pronouns out, and then work out which box does this go into. When you're thinking about using the pronouns in writing, it's going to be important. For now, it is something you just asked to see. So reflexive pronoun, so that's words like myself, yourself, herself, itself, themselves. And what you're doing when you use those words is you're referring back to the personal thing. So you must have already mentioned that person or thing in order to do that. And if you're looking at subject, verb, object, and you're thinking about referring back, so that's what that arrow is showing you, referring back to the beginning. I hurt myself. Yes, you don't say I hurt I or I hurt me. So I hurt myself. You do this naturally. So this is just a quick revision. Thinking about yourself, himself, themselves, and it may be the word themselves as a pronoun that you actually don't use a lot, so that'll be interesting to find out. So you hurt yourself. Again, remember the reflexive pronouns referring back. He hurt himself. What about herself? The name Jane hurt herself, and you can see I'm using the same verb just to show you that it changes only by the pronoun that you're using. So again, itself. When we talked about itself, what do we use as the noun when we are calling it it? Well, I'm just going to mention the dog or the cat. The dog hurt itself. Ourselves, remember that you're talking about more than one. So you're going to say we. We hurt ourselves. I see that arrow again showing you that if you're doing that reflective pronoun, then it's being used to refer back to the first noun or pronoun that you've used. So reflexive pronoun, again, go over those yourselves. You hurt yourselves could be asked as a question. Themselves, that's an interesting one because that's one that you may not use as often. You need to think about being accurate when you're writing. So if you're talking about they, or you mention a group of names, or you just mention a group, then if you want to refer back to them, it's themselves. They hurt themselves. Yes, they hurt themselves. Or if you want to do it as a question, they hurt themselves. And remember, the difference between the statement and the question, when you look at it in writing, will be that the question will end in a question mark. But when you say it, you've got to have that inflex, that change in the sound of your voice. They hurt themselves, same sound pattern is showing you that it's a statement. They hurt themselves, and going up with the sound at the end demonstrates it's a question. So relative pronouns. So relative pronouns, this is really when you're using who, which, whose, that, where, when. And when we cover writing, these might be the pronouns that we need to look at in terms of the difference between the way we say it and the way we write it. So you can use a different pronoun when you speak because dialect and ways of speaking in different areas is acceptable. However, when you're writing, you really need to follow that standard English, and I will say to you, you need to use the correct relative pronoun. So have a quick look there to see that who is people, which are animals, objects or ideas, whose, possession, that, people, animals or objects, where, places, and when, time. And we talked about how that word whose, don't mix it up with who is, whose, WHO''S, totally different, but whose is actually a pronoun. So let's have a look at some examples. Spain is a very hot country where I spend a lot of my time. Jenny is a friend who is very helpful. Helen is having a party next year when she is 20. And remember that when you're using these pronouns, sometimes you can turn the sentence around. So when Helen is 20, she's having a party next year. You don't have to put these pronouns in the place that they are in this sentence. Jinx has sharp claws which hurt. Yes, they do. And Harry looks just like his mom, whose relatives also look like her. J.K. Rowling is an author who wrote about Harry Potter. Children don't always like going to school where they get bullied. A car has brakes which should be maintained regularly. So that's just an example. Think about where do you use those words in sentences. What about demonstrative pronouns? Much simpler. This, that, these, those. So you know that when you're using this, you're using it because it's much closer to you. Look at this when you're showing somebody something. When you use that, it's much further away. Perhaps you're walking down the road and you point to across the road. Look at that. When we use these, it's plural. When you go to the shops, perhaps you might say, oh, I need a pair of these. But you also need to think about the plural those. I need a pair of those shoes would be better than saying, I need a pair of these shoes. If I had the shoes in my hand, I would say, I need a pair of these shoes to show you. If I didn't have the shoes in my hand and they were perhaps in the shop, I would point to them and I would say, I need a pair of those. So do make sure that when you're writing, you use the correct pronoun. But when you're speaking, we don't have grammar police. Nobody's going to come up and say that's the wrong way to say it. Okay? So indefinite pronouns, this is all about not being specific, and we use these all the time. So you've got some examples there of something that's incorrect and when it's correct. And let's have a think about how we say it. Everyone should do what they can to help is the way we say it. I've heard this said a lot of times, but it's not correct in terms of English grammar, and it's not correct if you're going to write it, because the correct version is everyone should do what he or she can to help. Ask yourself, have you ever heard anyone say that? I don't think you hear that very often. And what about the incorrect version? Someone left their backpack in the library. Yeah, that's how I'd say it. That's how a lot of English people would say it. That's how a lot of people would use someone and their, because they're speaking. However, if you're writing, you need to be accurate. So it is actually someone left his or her backpack in the library. Sounds weird, doesn't it? Because when we're using indefinite pronouns, we sometimes mix them up because of the way that we speak. So don't forget this, these, that, those. We call them demonstrative pronouns. You don't really need to know the grammatical terminology, but you do need to know that when you use this, these, that, those, you're talking about people and things. So, who called last night? Which keys are yours? Whom should I tell? Yes, looking at that word whom, we talked about the difference between who and whom, and we'll do a little bit more about that later. What did you do when the electricity failed? Whose book is this? So let's have a look at that quick idea and tip that I got from the internet today. If you can replace the word with he or she or another subject pronoun, use who. So if I can replace who with a name or he or she, let's try that with the first sentence. She called last night. He called last night. Helen called last night. Yes, so you know that who is correct. If you can replace it with him or her or them, use whom. Whom should I tell? Well, I think for that one you'd probably have to turn the question around and say, should I tell him? Should I tell her? Should I tell Helen? Should I tell Jenny? So that's a really good tip there from the internet, but make sure you know how to apply it. And sometimes this is something that I'm adding to this tip. Sometimes you have to turn the question into a statement first before you can work out whether that tip actually works. But I think it's a good one. So intensive pronouns, we often use the sentence. Sometimes we just need to take a little time for ourselves, but we don't actually think of it as a pronoun. Myself, ourselves, yourself, yourselves, himself, herself, itself, themselves, oneself. And that's really a big tongue twister there. So you could see how sometimes your tongue is trying to get around those words all at the same time. And yes, you're right, I don't think you see in many places where you use oneself. What if I make a mistake? Doesn't matter, does it? Because we learn from our mistakes, and that's the most important thing. But with pronouns in today's society, we do have to take into account other people. So we do have to respect the fact that other people wish to be referred to in a different way. So it's easy if you make a mistake and the other person uses a different pronoun, then it's just sorry I meant. So what am I really talking about? I'm really talking about when you're in situations where you know somebody's name, where they come from, and their pronouns are different to what you expect. Well, I've been taught in my grammar he, she, they, them, and now you're telling me you want to be called them or he. So instead of questioning it, make sure you know it and use it, because that's just respecting somebody else. It doesn't matter whether you agree with the fact that they want to be known in that way. So quick check again. What am I talking about? I'm talking about if somebody is wearing a badge that identifies the pronouns, or if somebody is introducing themselves and they have a different pronoun. So if this is somebody whose name is Jason and doesn't want to be known as he and him, and wants to be known when speaking as they and them, I find that very difficult because we're used to using those pronouns, but we don't ignore it, we respect it. So in conversation, no, it might be different, but in an English exam, use the pronouns you've been taught, and in writing, use the pronouns in the way that they're meant to be in the structure of the sentence.